Hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. There's no place where any of us is more keenly aware of the influence of politics in our lives than when it comes to cultural issues that have become politicized. And unfortunately, when it comes to reclaiming our cultural foundations, sometimes it seems like the only way to do it is a brute force approach to go after it with legislation or looking for legal decisions and so forth. Well, one of the problems that we have is we've been reacting to the progressive left's pushing of its vision of what our culture needs to be like, and sadly, they've been very successful. In this episode of Nowhere to Hide, we're going to talk about ways to reclaim our foundation and the vision that will be required to make it a reality. Stay close.
Press clever bias, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Once again, I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide. Twice a week, I have a chance to sit down and go into some of the issues that are in front of us in just a little more depth, and specifically in more depth than what you're likely to encounter in our legacy media. When it comes to cultural issues in Idaho, we sometimes feel like we are on we're always trying to catch up. We're on the losing end of this proposition because it seems like all of these major institutions, from our schools, our colleges, our universities, even corporations, have been captured by diversity, equity, inclusion, ESG, and a bunch of other three-letter acronyms, which all result in leftist values being imposed as if, well, this is the natural thing that has to happen. But the key is they're being imposed. You can separate people into one of two groups. There are people who feel the need to control other people, and there are people who do not. It's really that simple. Those who are on the side of freedom are not in the camp of we've got to control everybody else. Sadly, again, most of our institutions have been captured by people who feel the need to control one another. This is why they've captured those institutions. So how can we push back in a way that will actually have the right kind of impact? In other words, leaving people free to make their own choices, but taking government force out of the equation. Let me illustrate to you why I think this might be a necessity. I want you to check this out. This blows me away. 58% of women and 34% of men age 18 to 34 say that they think that someone saying that there are only two genders, that's a red flag in a partner. Now they're talking about other things. What else would you consider red flags? Oh, they identify as a MAGA Republican. They have no hobbies. They say that all lives matter. And there it is, number 4 on the list, 58%. They say there are only two genders. Wesley Yang doesn't exaggerate when he says, the public at large has never been propagandized to believe made-up nonsense so rapidly. And where did they learn this nonsense? Come on, you know the answer, and so do I. They learned it at college or at the university, or increasingly they are learning it in our grade schools. Why? Because government has a key role in every one of those institutions, and the people who are in charge, the people holding those reins of power, are making sure that they are implementing this kind of indoctrination. And they've been doing it for a long time. You look at the mindset of young people even 10 years ago versus today. It's not surprising that so many are like, oh yeah, that's a huge red flag if they think there's only two genders. I mean, it's only reality that we're talking about here. I was listening to an interview earlier this morning with Idaho Freedom Foundation President Ron Nate, and he was talking to Bill Colley on his radio show in Twin Falls. And Ron was talking about how, it's not that there hasn't been the opportunity to push back, or at least to take the official edge, as in the state enforcement edge, out of things like DIE. Or DEI, sorry, that was a Freudian slip. DIE, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which could also stand for didn't earn it. But one of the things that Ron pointed out is there have been efforts within the legislature. Just last year, Senator Brian Lenny, or just this last session, actually, I should say, Senator Lenny had a bill that would have removed funding for DEI programs. I mean, look, most universities have had these programs put in. They have DEI coordinators, and they pay them very handsomely to go around and make sure that everybody is towing the ideological line. Now, many of them are beginning to eliminate those positions, and thank goodness. But in Idaho, we never got a chance to even vote on it. Why? Well, I'll explain why in just a moment. This is what Ron pointed out. This was S-1357. Senator Lenny's bill came up to cancel funding for any diversity, equity, and inclusion offices in Idaho universities. Why did it not receive a single vote because it was never brought up to ever even be discussed. Here's the lowdown. Ron says Idaho's legislature is a representative government, or so we thought. But instead of 105 legislators casting their votes on the hundreds of proposed law changes, bills often live and die at the whim of a single stubborn committee chair. In this case, it was Senator Jim Guthrie, who took it upon himself to be the self-appointed killer of conservative bills in the Idaho Senate. Now, when this was written, this was back in March, Senator Guthrie was regularly abusing his authority by locking up bills in his drawer, using them for leverage, and refusing to allow any debate or votes on issues that he didn't like. Does this sound like abuse of the democratic process? Just wondering. Ron asks, do you want to eliminate spending millions of dollars on diversity, equity, and inclusion in our universities? Guthrie says, no, it must stay. Well, would you like to see a committee conduct hearings and interview officials on Idaho's COVID lockdowns and mandates? By the way, that needs to happen. Again, Guthrie says, no, we won't allow transparency on those issues. Okay, do you want Idaho to prohibit requiring public employees to use certain pronouns? Guthrie will have none of it. So the problem here is it's not being given a fair shake. One person is controlling it, and I don't know if that's going to be a problem in the upcoming session, but this is one of the things that Ron points out is he says you've got to have a better way of doing things. And this is not Ron saying this part here. This is the Idaho Freedom Caucus rising to the challenge and saying, okay, we agree. We need to reclaim those cultural foundations that have been lost. And part of that is being seen in a shift in Idaho's legislative elections. And hopefully November's elections will continue to bear this out. There will be a much more conservative flavor to the legislative body when they meet this coming January. But this article from the Idaho Freedom Caucus just a few days ago on their Substack talks about the need for a vision to strengthen Idaho. In other words, it's not enough just to react to all of these progressive left-wing moral imperatives that have been imposed on us in the name of we know what's best now. Everybody shut up and go along with it. Here's how they put it. They talk about historically, Republicans have often found themselves on the defensive, primarily focused on safeguarding individualism by resisting the progressive agenda of the far left. Now, in contrast, Democrats typically take the offensive, masking their anti-human, anti-Christian, anti-American vision with terms like human rights, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's true. And by the way, if you're opposed to any of those things, why, you're presumed to be a bad person, as opposed to just a mindless sheep bleating and going along with them. So the result? Well, the progressive left is winning the culture war by dominating the arts, music, and entertainment industries. They've infused our government infrastructure with political correctness and wokeness. And sadly, they've captured our children through confusion and indoctrination in centers we call public schools and colleges. So this is probably stuff that you've seen. And the Idaho Freedom Caucus says, look, we're convinced these wins are due to conservatives not recognizing the seriousness of the threat and lacking both a clear vision and a plan to achieve how to counter this. Now, in contrast, the left has a very well-defined vision of their future goals, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to achieve them. So the bottom line here is conservatives have to do more than react to the regressive vision of the left. We must present a positive vision to move our nation and state forward based on preservation of freedoms and traditional Western values. Now, here they outline what exactly they're talking about. And this is going to cause people like Jim Jones to actually have palpitations. Reclaiming Idaho's sovereignty and liberty, a vision rooted in constitutional principles and Christian values. To people on the progressive left, and yes, that would include a lot of the old school establishment Republicans, that means we're going to go around imposing goodness on everybody. But I want you to listen to what this foundation looks like, what it's built of. The Idaho Freedom Caucus envisions a sovereign Idaho that fiercely protects individual liberties and promotes innovation by limiting federal overreach and government expansion. Grounded in the Idaho Constitution, our vision ensures that Idaho's natural resources benefit its citizens first, that individual rights are safeguarded, and that true innovation flourishes through free markets and the decentralization and checks and balances on government. I mean, this is pretty standard Civics 101 stuff right here. Nothing radical about that. We advocate for dual federalism, where the federal government is restricted to its constitutional roles and Idaho is neither dependent on federal grants nor subjected to unconstitutional federal regulations. Now, this vision also emphasizes reclaiming federal lands in Idaho, employing the 10th Amendment to protect our state. You do remember what the 10th Amendment says, right? Those powers not explicitly given to the federal government are reserved to the states and the people respectively. In other words, if it isn't in the Constitution, the federal government shouldn't be doing it. It's kind of a forgotten amendment, but it still has great power. And of course, advancing freedom by upholding constitutionally protected rights. Now, rooted in Christian principles, we promote the inherent dignity, read this, of all individuals while rejecting secular humanism, collectivism, and divisive ideologies. In other words, your worth is not dependent on which group you identify with that deserves this many more privileges than that group because allegedly they have the privilege and you don't. Everyone is considered equal before the law because they are individuals before the law. You see how that works? But the left has very successfully muddied the water on this one over many, many years. The Idaho Freedom Caucus says by promoting private market solutions and decentralization, we will reduce government interference, eliminate burdensome regulations, and curb the expansion of bureaucracy. This approach will enable local communities and economies to thrive, encouraging financial freedom and the development of close-to-community goods and services that meet regional needs, which, by the way, will also result in lower taxes. Shouldn't hear too many complaints about that. They say our vision supports a localist economy by reducing reliance on consumerism, strengthening supply chains, and advocating for sound monetary practices, including a resource-based currency, the establishment of a sovereign state bank, and promotion of small, locally owned banking institutions. Again, that decentralization is a great way to break up those power centers and return choice and competition to the equation, which in turn gives you more choices, more freedom, more ability to exercise your agency. Listen to this part. In education, we emphasize the protection of homeschooling and choice, the pursuit of competitive standards, and diversification of educational channels to drive true innovation and effectiveness. In other words, it would require allowing people to choose things that are outside of the state-run school system. Perish the thought, but that's, if you look at how captured that system has become, that's an alternative a lot of people would really love to take advantage of. At the heart of a healthy society, they say, are traditional family values, with policies that support and protect families, encouraging children to thrive. We affirm that society's success hinges on monogamous, committed marriages between a man and a woman who are willing to have children. Gee, what a novel idea. It's only one that's been followed by virtually every civilization throughout human history, and it's only in recent times that we've somehow bought into this mantra, well, love is whoever and whatever you come home to, and everything is equal. It's not all equal, and that's not to put down people in mixed marriages or, blended families or things like that. It's just that the pattern, what works, what builds the greatest stability is exactly what they say here. Monogamous, committed marriages between a man and a woman and the children that they raise. A committed dad and mom are vital for raising children with sound moral values and ensuring societal well-being. In other words, you don't outsource it all to experts who will tell your kids to question, who or what they are. In education, they say we reject the status quo of the failed monopoly of government-run schools that stifle innovation and promote mediocrity. Instead, we support schooling and policies that strive for excellence tailored to each individual student. Our legislative proposals will be rooted in Christian values, rejecting secular humanism and all forms of its supremacy. That's more important than you might think because atheist secular humanism is, right now, America's state religion. It masquerades as, this is neutral territory. But if you look at the taxonomy of what makes up a religion, the beliefs, the dogma, the sacred words, the core belief, the original sins, and how do you get expiation, it's definitely a religion, and it's a very jealous religion at that. Last but not least, additionally, they say we will reclaim arts and culture by promoting wholesome, community-focused programs that highlight local talent and reflect positive values rather than globalist agendas and victimhood. Victimhood is the reason why people in lingerie want to dress up as the opposite gender and dance for your children. We're victims. People don't accept us. Therefore, we need to dance in front of your children. Oh yeah, it makes perfect sense. This vision is centered on enhancing parental rights, promoting personal virtue, and revitalizing Idaho's cultural and educational landscape. Pretty radical stuff, right? Okay, I don't think it's that radical. And frankly, Normal people wouldn't find that especially radical. Now, people who want to control other people who want to indoctrinate others into a particular mindset that they really aren't willing to accept, oh, it's terrible, it's radical, it's right out of A Handmaid's Tale. You tell me, who's out of touch with reality? Who is turning their back on what has traditionally worked? I think it's pretty self-evident. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Press club or bias, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.